Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's installment of the PENC webinar series. My name is Katie Cox. I'm the PENC Membership Director, and I will be serving as moderator for today's presentation. If you have any technical issues today, please use the chat box and I will try my best to assist you. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation. You can type those into the questions box and I will ask those for you. Today's presenter is David Tuttle. David has served the NC Board of Examiners for Engineers and Surveyors as board counsel since July 1st, 1994, providing legal guidance to the board, to staff, and to licensees. Having graduated from North Carolina State University with a Bachelor of Environmental Design in Architecture, and having earned a Juris Doctor degree from the University of North Carolina School of Law, and as a licensed attorney, he returned to the engineering architectural field with a national firm for 7 years, where he served as project manager in all phases of the design and construction process, including contract administration. He then entered the private practice of law for 8 years in the areas of business, real property, and estate planning law prior to his present position with the board. Mr. Tuttle is an associate member of the National Council of Examiners for Engineering and Surveying, NCBELS, presenting at national meetings on numerous topics, and having served for 5 years on the Law Enforcement Committee and 5 years as a member of the Uniform Procedures and Legislative Guidelines Committee. In addition, he served on the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. After moving to Chapel Hill, he served on the Greenways Commission and the Central West Focus Area Steering Committee. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for all of you in attendance. I'm not seeing your faces, I'm not hearing your voices, but please feel free to chat to Katie with any questions you have along the way, and I've told her that I'm perfectly comfortable with trying to address those as they come up, or we may defer some of them until later, but I want to make sure and hopefully save some time at the end for some additional questions. But glad to do this today. As you can well imagine, and I've been saying from the beginning about 3 months ago or whatever, that we're living in a new world. And hopefully all of you are managing well in this new world, and part of managing in that new world are some of the questions that you have had. And I hope we address some of those today, bring up any of the other ones that you have. Working remotely, it's a new paradigm for most of us. I was doing some working from home, but not to the degree that I am currently doing it. As I was telling Katie, I don't know how many of you are just about zoomed out like I am, but this is the first time I've been a presenter on one of these. The others I have been a participant. But I do want to address the things, and you will see from the slides here that starting with our website, I want everybody who's not familiar with the website, the way it's redesigned last September, to go and take a look at it if you haven't already. And the blocks and all that shows up, and board news, that's something that you can check from time to time if you don't already follow this, Twitter or Facebook. But the board news, you'll see a notice on there. There's a CPC update from April, and then there's a COVID-19 shelter-in-place order from March 26th. Some of you may have seen that, but we're getting a lot of questions, and this first set of questions about it had to do with the shelter-in-place orders. We were having people say, well, wait a minute, can I go out and visit with a client? Can I continue to offer my services? Surveyors are saying, can I go out in the field? Can I go on people's property? Can I leave my office? Are we an essential service? I think most of you will find, and it sorted itself out pretty early on in the process, but initially it wasn't clear as far as engineering and surveying, was that within the essential services category? It was deemed that basically it was. In other words, I guess at least as much as Home Depot is, where you go and you might have some reason to get some supplies to address issues of safety or keeping the house operating or whatever else. Certainly there are aspects of engineering that need to go on and continue, and sometimes even more so because of the nature of having to address issues that are much harder to address if everybody's not available. So the board did on March 26th just said, okay, in response to this, the board doesn't really have a say-so on it because it's up to local jurisdictions, but please just check with them, and then if there's any clarifications needed, just check with your local jurisdiction, which a lot of you may have done because our questions tapered off pretty quickly on this as people got used to working under the orders of the local governments and governor's executive orders. The additional question came about CPC, and we had questions from almost day one. Are we going to get extra time on CPC? You know, because all of a sudden seminars that you'd signed up for, live sessions, were being canceled, or they no longer were scheduling any new ones. The board looked at it, and like I say, with our licensees also being, our board members being licensees also, they contend with the same thing, having to meet their continuing education. So the perspective on it between staff and the board was that we had quite a bit of time to work with. Some boards were dealing with a renewal as early as April 15th or June 1st or July 1st, and for those boards, they did some emergency rulemaking to extend the deadlines. With our board, just looked at it and said, okay, we can put this off some, but we want to let licensees know that don't hold on to the fact that there may be some kind of extension, because that is not envisioned and still is not at this point, because everyone has until the end of December, and then actually has a little grace period if you wait and renew during the month of January. You don't pay the late renewal, you don't pay a reinstatement fee, but we don't want you renewing by December if you don't have your continuing education unless you renew inactive. So that still gives you January to potentially get the remainder of your hours. And the offerings have increased, and some of you may have noticed this. I've noticed this with my law license and my also carry a real estate broker's license. Both of those, the number of online offerings increased quite a bit. So it's making it a little bit easier to do so. So that's how we are on CPC right now. I'm going to talk about CPC, the specific requirements, in a little while, so that everybody can kind of get a refresher on what is required. And the only thing I'll say right off the bat here is that something like this webinar is considered a live session. So you don't have to look at it and say, well, wait a minute, is this a correspondence, an internet course? No, that's talking about videotaped, kind of on-demand type courses where you do not have the current live session. The board rules on this for requirements of attendance, and we're kind of putting that in quote these days because you are attending this session, and it falls under the same as if you were at a live session, because it's being monitored. There's sign-ins. The organizer confirms that you have taken it, and there's no exam required. That's the difference primarily. An exam is required when you do some of the other, video seminars. If you've done any other online education, you know that there is an exam requirement. Otherwise, you just have to have the sufficient documentation. So we do have some additional information on the website about continuing education, and we have some FAQs, and some of you may have already dealt with Martha Mikulowski in the past about questions, and so that's one of her major roles with the board, is to monitor that and work with the sponsors, with you realizing that you don't have to take courses from sponsors, but that's certainly a way that you can get those courses. Today, what I want to do is end up back at CPC requirements, but in the meantime, what I want to do is get at the real big thing that came up early on, and people are calling and saying, hey, I'm working from home, I got to sign and seal my documents. I got a set of plans here, 24 by 36s or possibly even bigger, but that I need to sign. I don't have a large format scanner, so I can't, print out the original, sign the original, scan it back in, send it electronically, which is one way that would have been acceptable and maybe done in the past. It's not really, the office is closed, I can't go in to do that. So all kinds of questions were coming up. So what we did, we were answering those questions, and in addition, provided some information on our website about how to handle that. What I want to go through today is the fact that, and it worked out very well, that the board from 1997 had put a rule in place that allowed for digital signatures. I won't say it was anticipating anything like what we're dealing with right now, because nobody, I don't think, could have anticipated what we're dealing with, especially to the degree that we're dealing with it. But with that being said, we've gone back and looked at what the board rules allow, what the statutes allow. The board is comfortable that we didn't need to make any changes that would all of a sudden loosen the requirement for signing and sealing. Early on, there was some, and we definitely looked at it because we had a lot of individuals questioning, can I just use a digitized signature? Basically rubber stamp signature, and so, or can I use it, generate in the computer so that when I send the document, it's already got it in it without having to get the software. But I'll go through and answer that more fully, because you do have to follow the board rules. Just to refresh everybody on the scheme of licensing and compliance with your the board's requirements for practicing engineering. You have the statute, GS 89C, which all of you are familiar with, and that's the law as generated by the General Assembly. Within that law, it puts the responsibility on the board and the authority to adopt rules. Those rules are law also, but they are codified in the North Carolina Administrative Code under Title 21, which is the title where all of the licensing boards rules reside, and we specifically are Chapter 56 for engineering and surveying. So that's when you click on that on our website, it takes you to a link to the North Carolina Administrative Code, and you see all the different sections. And so once again, I say that that's law. So between those two things, and it's actually under the oversight of the Rules Review Commission that's in place by the General Assembly. But then the next level is the board is authorized and charged with interpreting the statutes and the rules. And to do that, the board has issued policies and guidelines in addition to answering individual questions that you have. Many of you have contacted us and me and received email responses, letter responses, had the board through its committees respond. And a lot of those types of issues and all have then been turned into policies and guidelines that you can find that will help carry that out. And the reason I'm leading up to is that we have a set of guidelines on signing and sealing documents. It essentially is it's a PDF of a PowerPoint presentation, not quite as current as what I'm doing today, but has the basic information in it, and a lot of these slides are shared with it. And then also signing, sealing, building, imaging, modeling, BIM projects, integrated project delivery project guidelines. That has become even more intense as a result of this stay at home and working remotely, because more are getting into the technology of producing the projects totally in 3D and in computer files. And so that helps explain it, but I'm not going to get into that part of it today. If you want to go further with that, certainly contact me.
David, there's a quick question about signing and sealing.
Sure.
When I seal a drawing, sign and date, do I have to add my address?
Yes, and I will get to that. And it's typically you have to add the address of the business firm. In other words, whoever you're employed by or doing it on behalf of, unless you're sole proprietorship, then you would be treated as your own business, and you would do that, but I will hit that when we talk about the information that has to be placed on the document in just a little while. The next level below policies and guidelines on our website are references to our newsletters and a couple separate articles that are also included in that list. So we got some articles, and then we have the newsletters. And one that summarizes some of the stuff on signing and sealing practices is kind of a more like a narrative as opposed to the slides that I provided in the guidelines, is to sign or not. And that just goes over some of the stuff we'll talk about today. And then also certifying record drawings, because that's one that invokes a lot of times where you are called upon to show some revisions on a set of drawings that you may or may not have initially signed and sealed. So those will be helpful for that. And so the main thing I want to point out on certifying record drawings in any of the documents that you do, and basically in protecting the public, is as long as you're always straightforward, clear, truthful, objective, include all pertinent and relevant information in what you do, you're not going to have any problems, because it really comes down to putting yourself in that position of the public, which could include the regulators, the contractors, anybody relying upon your work. If you're in that position, what would you understand from what you received? Do you understand to what extent you can rely upon it? What is it really telling you? What is the professional engineer standing behind? And so record drawings are one that, if it's just transfer of red lines from the contractor or from the owner, then you want to say that. You're going to still sign a seal saying, hey, I'm issuing this as a set of record drawings, but it's only reflecting red lines that were received from the contractor, from the owner. It was not from daily observation or inspections or that type of thing. And if it was, then you can state that. So that's kind of where that article goes. A few questions just to kind of, this has come from previous presentations I've done, just to lead us into maybe where we'll end up on some of the things about signing and sealing. What about signing and sealing work that was not initially done by you or someone who was under your responsible charge? Can you just review that and then sign and seal? But you'll see the answer once we get through the rest of this. And if you don't, we'll cover it at the end. Second, like, how do you handle a situation to where the person who is in responsible charge or was in responsible charge is not available to sign and seal the work, now it needs to go out? That's become even more critical recently. It's not because the person is on vacation or the person's in the hospital or the person no longer works for the firm, but it may be simply because they're not physically located in the office, and you've got your professional engineers working from their own locations, and this become a less of a thing as you move back into the office. But at the same time, we may very well see, and a lot of you probably anticipate, that you will be working from home even more in the future, for a lot of reasons, efficiencies or whatever else. But to get those sets of plans pulled together, properly signed and sealed and then issued, the logistics are something that we'll look and see how that can be impacted and handled now. The other thing is, I mentioned before, you're working remotely and you don't have an ability to print out a full size print and hand sign and then scan it. So we'll address that. What this invokes is two different areas of the board rules: the standards of professional conduct under section 0700, and then also the section 1100, signing and sealing. And so under the rules of professional conduct, the rule that all of you are familiar with, I'm sure, is responsible charge. I say it's our most popular board rule, 0.0701C3, not necessarily because people just love it or like it or whatever else, but because we probably deal with that particular provision more, and it's the basis of really everything that the professional engineers put out there and sign and seal. And that means that you're competent to do the work that was done, and either you or an employee of yours did the professional portions of that work. It does allow for say the CAD work or the so-called drafting, other technical parts of it to be done by a non-licensee, but the PE would then still accept the work and go from there. If you're presented with a set of plans that has already been, has already been done by someone and it's presented to you and said, hey, I know you didn't do this, but we need you to sign and seal it. And that may be because you have the digital signature and they don't, or whatever. And the best thing is for them to get it. But if not, it may be that you could become in responsible charge by going back and basically developing your own design file, just as if that other person is no longer available. And then it points out here, the drafting and technical services can basically don't have to be redone by the licensee. If more than one licensee is signing on the same work, once again, that's coming up more as an issue now. It can be done, but it has to be very clear who's signing and sealing as to what portion of the work. Easiest way is typically to do this kind of work on separate sheets, and that may be more so in the future. And then, yes, interesting, leading into section 1100 on signing and sealing, the very first provision in signing and sealing is to say, hey, you've got to be in responsible charge before you sign and seal. So that's the tie-in with the rules of professional conduct, .0701. And then you go from there and start with 3 different provisions. Paragraphs A for signing and sealing drawings, B for signing and sealing reports or other documents, calculations, whatever, and C are the provisions and statements that can be placed on a document and it becomes optional whether you have to sign and seal. And that's going to become a very important one right here, because if you need to get something out to somebody, and someone was asking me the other day and said, hey, I've got to issue this, I need to get it to them, and I don't have a way of signing and sealing it, I've got to send it to them electronically. And I said, well, is this being issued as final? Basically, is this being issued for a final purpose, or is being required to be signed and sealed by the jurisdiction or the client? And if not, it may be that you can issue it with one of the preliminary type statements and postpone when you're going to actually have to sign and seal. But looking at this for drawings, I'm going to go through the specific details on what has to be done on a drawing or map of survey, and then tell you that tell you the one difference for reports and other documents. First, you've got to certify the original drawing from which you're going to make copies, or the reproducibles, which would be you sign whatever you're going to be making copies from, and then those copies are considered certified. Second, the seal you can put on there any way that you want to. Doesn't matter as long as it's a permanent addition to the plan sheet. And some of you will maybe remember the sticky backs that used to curl up and fall off of drawings, off the Mylars. That's why the board many years ago had to add this provision that whatever you put on there has to be a permanent addition. Otherwise, it kind of sounds out of place for people. That how could it not be permanent if it's put on there by the plotter, or by rubber stamp, or the embossed seal? The third item is that the written signature must be placed over or near the seal on the original document. And it just says you can't place that signature any other way than hand signing it yourself. But then we'll get into the digital signature in just a few minutes. The date of signing must be annotated. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I mean, the practice a lot of times is just to put it right there with the signature. But as long as you have a date on the drawings in your title block that's clear, that's the issue date, that's the date upon which you are signing and sealing it, then that's acceptable. And then all sheets of engineering and surveying drawings must be sealed. This is where we're going to have a difference with the reports and calculations and other documents. The name, address, and license number of the licensee's firm. Now, this is where, as I said, in answer to the other question, that it's not so much your personal address. In fact, it's only going to be the name of your firm, the company who's actually contracted to do the work, that's issuing the work, and that you work for. So you're going to put the name of the company and the address and license number of that company. The license number, that provision was added as a requirement, I think, in 2009. Before they just said address. And I mentioned that for sole proprietorships, if an individual works totally the sole proprietor, then their name as their license with the board has to be used as their name in producing the work, and they would use their address, and their individual license number would be their firm number. Next item is any revision has to be clearly denoted. Whether you cloud it or highlight it or describe it in notes or whatever else, it's got to be clear what you're signing and sealing that each time you make a revision, so that nobody looks at the document and wonders, well, what changed? It's got a new date on it. And anytime you produce a new original, you once again have to sign and seal. It's not like the old Mylars where you leave your signature and seal initially signed on it, and then all you do is just put a revision block date. In this case, every time you're producing a new original, so you've got to re-sign and seal. For specifications and reports, like I said, it starts off and it has all the same provisions except for number 5. It's only the title sheet of engineering specifications and other reports that have to be certified and have the name and address of the business firm. Not every page of the specifications, and so anything that's kind of put together as a bound type document, or page 1 of so many, like calculations have to be calculations you need to sign and seal as an engineering work product, and you might put sheet 1 of 15 and then sign and seal that first sheet. To get to the basic question is, what all do you have to sign and seal? Well, it's anything that conveys in any way your engineering knowledge, whether that's through some analysis, judgment, recommendations that you're doing, because whoever's receiving that as a member of the public to be protected needs to know that they can rely upon it, that it's not something preliminary, that's something that was not done by the PE or was not meant to be used for the purpose they're using it or whatever else. And emails is a little tricky because so much of the stuff we do and have been doing now for several years is by email instead of by letter. About the best way you can do that is if you have to issue some information by email, then you may refer that this is will be followed up by a certified document, and then you can print out the email, sign and seal it, scan it back in, and send it or whatever. And that's always a way of doing it. Or you can use digital signatures that we're going to get to in just a minute here. I mentioned the statements under paragraph C. As long as you use a statement that's substantially the same as the wording in one of these statements, which include the initial 5 statements that the board had, and those are ones that the first 4 were the basic ones, and those were pretty much talking about preliminary. In other words, it's not released for construction. It's clear to everybody that, hey, this is not the final thing to rely upon. At that point, it becomes optional whether you sign and seal. Now, the regulatory agencies and your clients may very well require that it be signed and sealed, and that's okay. That's not against the board rule. It's just that you need to have the statement on it if you're releasing it to them and it's not final. Number 5 was added in maybe 2005, or no, I think it's even before that, to address these review copies that you send, and the local jurisdiction was saying, hey, we need you to just go ahead and sign and seal this, and we're going to review it for permitting. And you're sitting there like, wait a minute, I can't sign and seal this final because I'm going to have review comments come back to me. I'm going to have to make revisions. I need to separate out the sets, and I don't want to release it for construction at this point. So the board, working with the inputs from the State Construction Office and also the City of Raleigh and City of Charlotte, came up with a statement that everybody was agreeable to, and it's been working very fine. It just says final drawing for review purposes only. The local jurisdiction didn't want stuff submitted preliminary for review purposes because they said they were having to do too much of the checking, or the sets weren't really ready for review and all that. So this way, you're telling the local jurisdiction, this is final as far as I'm concerned, but I know I'm going to get comments. I'm going to have to make some revisions. Other things may come up between now and the time we issue it for construction. The last 2 items that were added on this, one was you've got a document in your file, you've got an original, it's not signed and sealed because the practice of the company may have been to wait and sign and seal copies, which does become problematic at some point in time when you need to reissue these, because if you pull something out of the files and hasn't been signed and sealed as that previous date, you have to sign and seal it as of the current date, replacing your signature, and you can put a statement on there that this was originally issued at a certain point in time. Or even better is, in this case, just put a statement that says, hey, this was originally issued either by yourself or by somebody. It's normally issued by another individual, and it's not going to be considered certified as to that original work, but only as to the revisions that are, and it's not, I'm sorry, we don't have anybody certified at this point in time. So I'm certifying it to say that I'm issuing it, but it was not ever signed and sealed by anybody else. And this is not be considered certified. We're simply issuing this for your use. Number 7 is when you make a revision to it, such as for as-built or record drawings, and you're saying, okay, I didn't do the original work, so I can't sign and seal as to that, but I'm going to sign and seal as to revisions, and everything else you'll have to rely upon what was on the original documents, which officially are not certified in this set that's being provided. Just to emphasize, anytime it doesn't say it's preliminary, then it's considered final. Electronically transmitted documents. We've got 3 paragraphs that concern that. The main ones that we want to look at are D and E. First of all, D is not going to be talking about digital signatures. That's going to be an E. So under D, you know, we've always been able to, even before digital signatures came along, you could make copies of appropriately signed document, and it was considered certified. So whether you did a black line, blue line print, you took a photograph of it, you scanned it, you faxed it, whatever else, that was all permissible. So all of a sudden you were sending an electronic version, but it was just a copy, a picture of what you had signed and sealed. However, if you were to send the CAD document or something that was easily modifiable, which has become known, maybe that PDFs are kind of take on that connotation now. In the early days, it wasn't so easy to modify a PDF. But so you put a statement: this document originally issued and sealed by. You can put your name, license number, whatever, date of sealing, and that this medium shall not be considered a certified document. So if you are, your owner is asking for the CAD documents, so you're going to provide CAD documents. There again, the board does not require that you do that. That would be a contractual issue. But if you do provide them, then the board says this is how you will provide those, and you will note that on here so nobody mistakes those for being the signed and sealed documents too easily, either on purpose or just by layers not being turned on or other issues. The document may not, as printed out from the CAD file, be what was originally signed and sealed. So anyway, that basically differentiates between those that are easily modified and those that are not. And so you're pretty safe to send them that way. So that's why when I refer to this, that you can always sign and seal something, scan it, attach it to an email, and send it to people. A very easy thing to do. Now we want to differentiate between this idea of an electronic signature and a digital signature. Electronic signature is basically any way that electronically you put a signature on a document, and that includes like digitizing a signature and putting it on there. It includes putting any kind of anything, as it says, that evidences that you meant to sign it. You may have seen on real estate offers to purchase. Many times the agent sends and just says, hey, just put an X on here. You know, I'm sending it to you from my email. You're going to send it back to me from your email. I know it was you. So if you put an X on there, then you've signed it. In commerce, a lot of that is acceptable and works fine. The engineering community many years ago and the boards decided that would not be sufficient for what is required within the practice of engineering, and architecture also went along with that, and so also surveyors. So then you have to have a digital signature, and that is a process by which, and many of you have used this or you've looked into it. More people are looking into it now because of the advantage or the necessity maybe to do it. And it's where you can place a signature electronically that confirms under the board rule that it can be authenticated. And it's that the signature, the digital signature, is unique to the person, the licensee. It's capable of verification that it is in fact the licensee who placed that on the document, that it's under the sole control of the licensee, and it's linked to the document in such a manner that the digital signature is invalidated if any data in the document is changed. So the two key things is that it confirms that that document is exactly the way it was when the licensee signed and sealed. And in addition, it authenticates the signature to say, yes, this was the signature of that individual. It's a registered signature, and it has not been reported as revoked or compromised. And so you should be able to rely upon that. I'm going to differentiate because I know a lot of you have been using the packages, or you ask us about them. I encourage you, if you're investigating it, send me a sample of what you're looking at or questions you have, and I can take a look at it. And I'm going to show you in a minute like what it's going to look at for those of you who have not received some of those documents. F just says that if a board creates a list of approved software vendors, but that's never been the case because the software packages, it's like trying to hit a moving target. Not only that, but the companies, there have been some acquisitions and mergers and taking over some of the different ones, and they offer different levels of their product that may or may not fully meet the board's requirements. Digitized signature, everybody's very familiar with that. You just sign on a piece of paper and then scan it and then place it on the documents. As you know, that would be very easily copied and lifted and put on other documents by other individuals. Self-certifying starts to look pretty good a lot of times when you investigate this, but in reality, when that document comes to me as the recipient, it asks me, do you trust the certificate? And so I have to make a determination, okay, can I trust this certificate? And you may look and say, and I may look at it and say, oh yeah, Bob just sent this to me. It came from his email address. He told me he was sending this and he just signed and sealed it. And so, yeah, I should be able to say I can trust it. Well, what about then that said, I pass it along to the contractor, or I pass it to, or I then provide it to the regulatory reviewers. You know, I'm handling it, I'm the owner, I'm a construction manager or something else. All of a sudden, they don't know where it came from. They don't have a way of doing that. So that's why we call it self-certifying. And there's a couple of other ones that an individual can create their own certificate, and it starts checking out a lot like it was a valid certificate. You may have seen on Adobe Acrobat, it has the little certificate up at the top, the little scroll, and if you click on it, it'll ask you if you want to add a certificate to your document. And you can do that if you want to for stuff, but that's not going to meet the board's requirements. The third one is the digital signature. And the key thing is it's verified by a certificate authority. Basically, Adobe Acrobat has generated quite a list themselves of certificate authorities that would be recognized. And that's why when the documents come to people now, it's not like in early days where you look at it and you click on it, and then you'd have to start checking it out to see, okay, what software package was this? What's it telling me? I need to get all these pop-ups and all. Now it typically comes back in a frame. Adobe Acrobat puts on, and it'll tell you up the top a lot of times, signature not verified. And then you can start clicking and see why it's not. Here's some examples for those of you who've not looked at either sent or received. At this point, when you click on the signature itself, where it says digitally signed, that gives you information. It tells you who digitally signed and sealed it. It has a date and time stamp. And in this case, it has a seal because the seal needs to be there to represent the license number of the licensee, and it is a North Carolina licensee. A digitized signature is not required to accompany this, but it can, and more that's the situation. In the early days, rarely did it have anything other than just say digitally signed by. And so if you click on that, then you start getting these signature validation status. and you've got some information up at the top, signature panel. And the more you click on these, you get the signature properties, and you see where it's telling you that the signer certificate is directly trusted or has been issued by a certificate authority that you have trusted to issue certificates. The path is successfully built, and not only that, but the signer certificate is valid and has not been revoked. Much as with when they run a check against your debit or credit card, and it goes out there and checks with the issuing authority and says, okay, is this card valid as of this time and date? And that's essentially what this does when you click on validating the signature. And as a result of doing that, it comes back and says, yes, there's a certificate of authority, and the path validation and revocation checks were done as of the time and date that's being checked, and everything is okay. Gives you even more information and describes, you can go in and look at the document, the signer, and a lot of other descriptions of just what this signature means. Here's another example just to give you a little bit, and like I said, a lot of these, they look different, a little bit different depending on the provider, but the key is to, as you notice in that left-hand side, the signature is valid and has not been modified since it was signed, the identity is valid, and then you come on down to where the verifying of signatures, you see that down in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, and this comes back and says, okay, it's now been verified and it's a valid signature. So that's the process. And the reason I went through all this and started with the original signature is just the original signature that has always meant that PE meant for that to be issued in the exact form that's being issued. So it's really the signature that controls that. And so to get something that would be essentially the same as that, otherwise a digitized signature is essentially, it's a facsimile signature, just like a rubber stamp signature. And how can that be under a person's individual control? We had an individual several years ago through an investigation was asked about it, and he said, well, I control my rubber stamp signature. I'm the only one that has it. If it's on there, it means I put it on there. And the investigator said, where is your rubber stamp? Where's the rubber stamp right now? And before the PE could answer, an individual in the other room said, oh, it's over here in my drawer. So that obviously said, well, maybe that control over it is not quite as what the level it needs to be. Talked a little bit about BIM and the project delivery systems. I don't know how many of you are using that right now. I'm finding more and more are, and there's some individuals and companies out there using it right now that are becoming quite experts with how to move through this entire thing of different people working within the same product. And the board does have, and we asked NCBELS probably 3 years ago now, to basically convene a task force to look at it nationally to say, okay, let's try to get some model rules, model laws in place that when jurisdictions do this, it'll be similar from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so we kind of held off going too far with ours. We had some stuff out there already, but we wanted to finalize it, and we're always stating that we're going to take into account the ultimate thing decided by NCBELS. So they're close to, but they've issued some pretty good information and all. And because of that, the draft guidelines they produced relies upon a project execution planning guide, where you have individuals specifically tasked with making sure that the 3D model is captured at certain points in times, that the PEs sign and seal as to that work that they've done as of that point in time, and all this can be tracked. Otherwise, you as a PE are wary sometimes of, hey, are the people in there working on my work, and how do we know who did what? And I want to take responsibility and liability for my work, but not for others' work. BIM's supposed to help coordinate that when somebody does something that might impact your work, maybe that will be flagged to you and say, hey, the mechanical engineer just put a duct through your beam. That's a very simple way of putting it, but so there are ways and advantages that can be gained from this, but at the same time, it is complicated how you go about signing and sealing. I was on a committee for some period of time, it's probably been 7, 8 years ago now, with attorneys and design professionals looking at what's the contract document. In other words, attorneys at that time were saying, hey, for us to draw up a contract, we need to be able to reference a set of plans, a hard copy set of plans that says, okay, here's what needs to be built. And moving to the thing of, well, we're going to issue a contract that refers to a 3D model that's going to be built, was a whole different way of looking at it, especially trying to determine this whole idea of, well, what's going to be acceptable to the board as far as signing and sealing that work so that everybody can rely upon it. And so that's been worked out fairly well. A lot of you may be familiar with the Hunt Library project on the Centennial campus of NC State. That project, we were very fortunate at the time that the board was looking into so much of this. We were able to have one of the architects and one of the engineers come in and talk to the board about the whole process they went through. And that project, and some of you that I'm talking to today may be intimately familiar with it, may have actually worked on it, may have been the individuals that had come and talked to the board. But what we gained from that was that it was a new day. I mean, if a contractor is going to install something by looking at a large video screen instead of a set of drawings right there on the site, and probably be able to better duplicate what was intended by essentially it having already been built once in the computer. So I think there's been a lot going in that direction, and we'll probably continue to move that direction. So, but the board has, just to let you know, has looked at that, and I'll take some questions right now, I guess, on signing and sealing before we hit and finish up with CPC rules, because I've already hit a little bit on CPC. So if there are any chat questions you want to get to Katie, it'd be good right now, or if you need to have a little more time to put it together, I can go ahead and move along with the CPC.
I don't see any questions coming through yet, so why don't you go ahead and...
Okay, well, we'll do that. They'll know that we're going to start coming to the end here in the next 12 minutes. So I was hoping that we'd have at least 5 or so minutes at the end for other questions, and maybe as much as 10 minutes, depending on how fast I move through this. Looking at CPC rules, I've given you a pretty good taste of how it's impacted by what we're dealing with now with the COVID-19, that there are no changes to it at this point in time. And part of the things I'm going to do here, show you some of the avenues that may allow you to more easily either be exempt from it, or find ways to get those hours that you more creative, things that you haven't really thought of or taken credit for before, because you're used to just going to a live course, 2 days worth of seminars each year that's sponsored maybe by PNC or other groups, and you had it done every year. You may want to look a little beyond that right now by chance, and have to, because and go to the webinars and other things. Licensees experience physical disability, illness, or other extenuating circumstances that prevent obtaining PDHs. A person is exempt, potentially exempt. I will tell you, a lot of times in extenuating circumstances, we could potentially be in an extenuating circumstance, and depending on the individual case and the facts of each individual, that's how it will be evaluated. It'll depend on the nature of it. Sometimes somebody convinces us that there's no possible way they can handle even an online course because of maybe impact on their mental ability or a lot of other things. And it brings into question, unfortunately, at that point in time, is if the individual can't handle doing an online course, can they handle doing engineering design? I'm not saying that's exclusive, but it does sometimes say that, there are ways to get the courses. So, but there are times, and the other thing the board will do sometimes is give additional time. If someone towards the end of the year hasn't gotten their PDHs, we're encouraging people to get them as soon as they can so they don't get in that crunch this year, because there may be fewer offerings of courses. But if a person does get into a bind because all of a sudden they're hospitalized, they're into a long recovery, they're obviously not practicing because they can't, so they can either wait and let their and then basically renew inactive, pay the renewal fee, but not claim any hours and just go inactive and not practice any during that time period, and then prior to needing to activate their license back, make sure they have the hours. So that's that provisional and inactive. That's the second option. Some people may just say, well, in light of everything, I'm not going to be providing any services for a while, so I'll just kind of ride this out with an inactive license. You don't want to wait. You want to try to do it within a year, because that way you're still within the frame of getting the 15 hours that you owed on it. Otherwise, you might have to do up to 30 hours and do 2 years worth, but that would be the maximum if you actually waited longer. You're all familiar with the 15 hours and how you can obtain those. And you're familiar with typical continuing education courses, college courses, and all that. And we talked about the correspondence courses. Here's some other things that you may not be aware of. Presenting or attending seminars, in-house courses, workshops, or professional technical presentations. We have on occasion done presentations for individual companies. Many of you are with firms that you probably had me come to your lunch and learn, and you knock out an hour of continuing education. No reason why that can't be done by Zoom or GoToMeeting or something at this point in time. And of course, if you teach one of those to your in-house people, as long as it's of a general engineering type nature and not specific to the procedures of your firm. So if you teach how you go about meeting the requirements for responsible charge over a project, meet the board rules, how you go about supervising, as opposed to here's our list of things that have to be done by the firm requires us to do on a project, more company specific, would not count. Authoring published papers, articles, or books. You write an article for magazine or other things. You can get 10 PDHs for that. Active participation in professional or technical societies. You know, serve as an officer or actively participate in a committee, and that has to be documented. You get that 2 hours after the end of the year in which you've done that. So that's not going to be a very fast one at this point, but it may be something that you're already doing and you just haven't thought about claiming credit for that this year. Patents, authoring exam questions. Now, authoring exam questions, other than land surveying exam, since we have a state-specific portion, would require that you author the exam questions under the format of NCBELS, and they have writing work sessions and conduct those, and they have a very specific format, and if you meet their requirements, then you get some credit for that. If you don't meet any and all of those things, or it may be determined through an audit, the key thing is that for an audit is to make sure that you have a log and records of the CPC activities. At one point in time, if one or the other, and I see now, this requires that you have the log, and you have to have some backup for it too, whether it's your notes, whether it's the materials, whether it's a receipt or whatever else. But the key thing is at one time, we would allow just a stack of that information to be submitted, and you didn't have to keep a log, and then we would have to go through it and figure out, well, wait a minute, what is this total up to? So you do have to do the log, and it also has a spot for you to tell why you think it counts. I don't want to get too much more on the audit process, but you can go on our website and we list under the FAQs a lot of things that do count and a lot of things that do not count, just as a common thing. I told you I'd leave you 5 minutes for questions. Just looking, and I think I've covered all these things about the change that it's a CPC log and attendance verification records. By the same token, we changed the thing about what it has to do for you that doesn't have to maintain and improve and expand your skills. It can do any one of those or a combination of those. So that was changed by the rule by the board. No exam required for a webinar presentation. We did that in 2011. Very fortunate we already had that covered. Then for other correspondence things, the change in 2011 required the exam. And we added the active participation on boards, commissions, committees, or councils of federal, state, federal, local. If you serve on your county water commission or something, you may be able to get 2 hours for active participation is earned as of the end of the year. So you can look into that. Okay, 4 minutes. Any chats coming in there, Katie?
Yes, okay. So the biggest thing we deal with here at the City of Asheville is receiving hard copy plans that have the image on it of the digital signature. How can we verify the validity of the signature, or is there a way to make these hard copy documents valid?
It's a good question. The hard document itself is not going to pass the test for you to know and be able to rely upon it. You need to have the electronic version of it submitted to you, and then you can click on it and do all the verifications. Then now, at that point, once you make a hard copy of it or receive the hard copy in addition to that, then you can use the hard copy as your working document and all. It's just that it's not going to be the document upon which somebody can place reliance on it. There's been some discussion, and I've oftentimes wished, but it's very difficult to get the software companies to really tailor their stuff necessarily to the practice, that when you were to do that verification from the electronic version, that it would come up with a pop-up and say, just like those pop-ups that you get when you click on it, and it would say, this has been verified, has not been modified since it was signed and sealed, and as of this date and time, the signature is valid, has not been revoked. And then when you made your hard copies, you would be able to look at it and say, oh, somebody's already verified this as of, today or yesterday or whatever. That doesn't happen at this point in time, so you've got to be able to do that yourself. The Register of Deeds in at least 5 counties or more now accept the recording of plats electronically, totally electronically. And what happens there is you've got an official government entity receiving it, checking it, knowing that it did pass the digital signature requirements. So when they put it on record, they're saying, hey, we've confirmed that it's valid. That may be available to City of Asheville if y'all wanted to, but it has to start with the electronic version, because people send me that same thing, like a hard copy or just a scanned copy, and ask me if it's valid, and I say, hey, send me the electronic version. I can't do any verification on this.
Okay. Is there a limit to leadership continuing education credits?
I'm assuming that's in the capacity of being an officer in an association or committee or whatever. Can I get a clarification on that? If that's what it is, then no, there's not a limit. You can there's a limit for the same organization in any one year, but you could do multiple organizations in the same year and get 2 PDHs for each. And you could also be an officer in multiple years and get 2 PDHs in each. So if you were vice president one year and president the next year, then you get 2 PDHs each of those years at the end of the year that you served in that capacity.
What about leadership as a topic?
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean printing? I mean, like presenting?
I think like if we had a webinar like this on a leadership topic, is there a limit to the number of those credits you can get?
Yeah, if you're talking about leadership in a capacity where it would be a leadership role in engineering or surveying or whatever, I'd say yes. it would not be kind of more in a more general leadership capacity, but if it could be tied to where that enables that PE to better perform their role in their organization by being a better leader, then I think you can certainly make the case for that. And I'd go through the specific list of items under the FAQ and see if you see any that hit closer to that. That'll give you a little bit of guidance, but there's no reason it would absolutely be barred, but it would have to meet the test.
Okay, great. We do have a couple more specific questions that I will forward to you, David, to answer offline since we're right at 1 o'clock. We appreciate you being with us today. Any last comments, David?
No, I appreciate everybody being there. You know, I couldn't see your faces today, but I understand that we had about 100, so that's a good crowd. So, and good luck with what you're doing. And please feel free to email me or call me individually. And I'll be glad to address your specific facts and situations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating today. Again, we will get your questions answered. If you have any additional questions, you can send them to exec@penc.org. Your PDH form and your survey will be emailed to you this afternoon. We have a PENC wine chat this Friday, June 5th at 4 p.m. This is an informal, just conversation, time to network with your PENC friends. If you would like to come, send me an RSVP. And then our next webinar is Wednesday, June 10th, and it's our Leadership Institute presentations. You can see our full webinar lineup at penc.org. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.